Hi, welcome back to TEM Expo. Our next speaker is Lukas Smith, right there. Lukas is a well-known public speaker in the open source community. Currently, he's both the co-founder at WittyWorks, a startup helping organizations to increase diversity and inclusion, great cause, as well as a partner in Leap, a web agency with 180 employees. There, he manages SaaS in a position called the Platform Gardener. Leap works as a holacracy, which he'll explain in this talk right here. But it means he can't say no to employee requests, which is just insane for any of us who have ever done this job, right? But he's going to show you how he makes it work. Just as a reminder, we've got this chat room right here where you can press pound, pound, pound to applaud. And remember to ask your questions because he's right here in the chat room with us. You can ask him about anything he talks about as it comes up. So please welcome our speaker, Lukas Smith.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, and let's get into the talk. So I'm going to talk about how we do SaaS procurement at Leap, self-organized Agile organization. So let me briefly introduce Leap. Leap is a Swiss company. We're a web agency. We have 5 offices all across Switzerland, 180 employees working towards one vision. Our areas of expertise are digital creation, development, and strategy and support. So we're really a full service agency. And as a result, we actually need quite a lot of SaaS products for our projects. These are the guiding principles at Leap: purpose over profits, trust over control, practice over theory, risk over safety, flexibility over strength, open over closed, compasses over maps. And these principles are really guiding us in how we do SaaS at Leap and in other areas as well, of course. And I will get into that a little bit more detail later on. So our path to self-management, we started the company in 2008. It actually is a fusion of 2 older companies. And in 2009, we introduced Scrum. 2012, we introduced cross-functional teams heavily inspired by Spotify and what they're doing. And then in 2016, we introduced holacracy to basically move towards full self-management. So what is holacracy in a nutshell? So holacracy really starts off with defining purpose for roles and then defining accountabilities on those roles. So really you have very clear boundaries about the expectations you can have in a specific role. Probably the most important aspect of it is that it separates roles from people. So anyone can have a role that is further up in the hierarchy of roles or further down in the hierarchy of roles. Switching roles or giving up a role, getting a new role doesn't automatically translate to salary or standing within the company. So people pick and choose roles more according to the best fit for the company in that moment, and of course also the best fit for them personally. And this is really one of the key things why we picked holacracy. So I mentioned there's actually a hierarchy of roles, and you see that in the picture on the side. These are sort of circles, and within those circles you have sub-circles and so on, and all these circles and sub-circles in the end consist of roles that are filling this out. And these circles really change all the time. So you don't have a change management process that happens every few years. You have it constantly. So you're constantly optimizing the organization. That being said, most of the roles are quite stable at some point. So once you've adopted it for the first half year, things are in flux and then they really stabilize. Unless then you have some more new things to deal with, like the COVID crisis, for example, of course, spawned quite a few new roles. Now, what is important, and again, this derives from these clear boundaries, is that you actually have a clear and transparent decision-making framework in place. You know who to talk to about which topics, and there's actually also quite a lot of structure that holacracy defines and how you change roles, and how, for example, you would deal with conflicts between 2 roles where they have overlapping accountabilities and things like that. And they also have a nice, efficient meeting structure as well. Some of this feels a little bit rigid, but really the idea is to take out a little bit of the personal aspects out of fulfilling a role, and to really make it a little bit more that you say, in my role, I'm speaking because I have this accountability. I am asking for this or for that, rather than me personally, I have this issue, which really quickly can lead to conflicts. And this is one of the things that Holacracy helps us. We do self-management, but Holacracy also deals with sort of the conflicts that usually are handled by upper management, by its internal structure. So how do we do SaaS at Leap, and how we do SaaS procurement more specifically? So one of the first things we did actually in 2016, right in the year when we adopted Holacracy, was to introduce a platform gardener role. And the purpose of that role is to streamline Leap-wide digital tools. So the accountabilities are assisting Leapers during procurement of SaaS products, defining which tools should be bought with the monthly allowances. We in fact actually give every employee an allowance on their monthly salary with which they can just buy small tools that we don't want them to have to do expense reports that are just annoying to do, that create a lot of work for the accounting team. So these are small tools like, I don't know, let's say Todoist or some specific client for doing screen recordings or something like that, which we don't really need to have a discussion at the company level about. Then the other thing is the platform gardener ensures that costs and use are really transparent to everyone within the organization to empower decentralized decision making. And I'll get to that a little bit further down in the talk. Then the platform gardener also ensures that topics like security and proper licensing are properly looked at during the procurement process, and also as we run these SaaS services over years to come. Then the last bit is just ensuring that the accounting team has access to the invoices and can easily figure out how those should be charged to other customers, or if these are internal costs, where do they belong. Now, I mentioned the Leap principles before, and I want to highlight a little bit what it means in practice to have these principles. So the first thing is that when we procure SaaS, that we actually make decisions also including ethical considerations. Trust over control means that Leapers take responsibility. So the final purchase decision is not made by me, the platform gardener, but actually by the person that requested the given service. Practice over theory means that, and that kind of relates to the previous one, it's not a top-down decision what we use, but it's more like really people in the trenches that are choosing. Risk over safety means that in general, when somebody suggests to use something new, the question is rather than, how can we mitigate the risk per se, is it safe enough to try? Flexibility over strength means that sometimes services might overlap, but we allow that overlap if there is a need from the line that is best met by allowing this overlap. Open over closed means that really we give full visibility for all Leapers into the costs and what is being used and how it's being used. And compass over maps means that rather than having a fixed list of services that is approved somewhere, we just set out some guidelines how to choose and how to make the final purchase decisions. Now, when I got this role in 2016, I quickly realized that I need a tool to help me to really be able to provide this level of transparency and all the other accountability. So we introduced Clean Shelf because it is really one of the few tools that is based around the principle that you work off of the invoices. So most other tools, they work off the credit cards. But since we wanted a tool that also really enables finance to get the invoices, that's one of the main decisions why we ended up with Clean Shelf. So inside Clean Shelf, Leapers get a full overview about the SaaS service we use, including the ones that we don't even use anymore. We have the invoices in there. We have the memberships, and I'll get to that little star in a moment. So we know who's using which service essentially. And then we do compliance reviews inside CleanShelf as well. The other thing is that we also track internal tools in there, and the purpose behind that is to give new leapers a single place where they can really discover all the tools we're using. Now, based on the invoice data that we get into CleanShelf, we can see the cost trends. And here you can see that the costs are trending up a little bit, and I would say COVID does play a role here. So we see, for example, new tools being added. So for example, Zoom was added. Despite us having G Suite and therefore Google Meet, people wanted breakout room functionality, which Zoom provided, so we added that. Miro basically is a tool for doing virtual workshops, whiteboarding, and so on. And that, of course, increased quite a bit when we had to do more and more meetings out of the home office. Scribble is a tool for digital signatures, and this is something that we didn't have before, and obviously now it's much more useful to be able to just sign things digitally because we don't meet anymore in person. And Trello we had before, but the use has really increased quite a bit. And so, we see this small increase over time with COVID. Now, how does CleanShelf actually get all that data? So we manually add the SaaS services into CleanShelf. Sometimes they don't know this service yet. So we just click a button, ask them to add it, and then within 24 hours, usually, we have the service added to the CleanShelf system. Then each service, we can then choose if we want to connect it directly to CleanShelf. And essentially, that means CleanShelf gets a login so that they can look at the invoices and that they can extract who's using the service automatically. And while this is a really powerful feature, we are a little bit concerned about giving CleanShelf direct access to SaaS services that don't have the concept of a billing role. So that's really a major annoyance. Many SaaS services don't provide this. So it means we need to would have to give CleanShelf full administrative rights, which, obviously CleanShelf has the necessary credentials in terms of certifications that they are secure, but still that's something that we don't really feel comfortable with. So we only do it for, services that do provide this, like G Suite and Microsoft and so on. Mostly the big players offer this kind of functionality. For those, everything is automatically taken care of. For other services, what we do is we actually either just forward the invoices via email or we manually upload them. And many service providers do make it possible to just receive a PDF by email, and ideally also to configure any number of emails that should also get this copy, but not all do. And again, this is just annoying. But at any rate, just forwarding an email is usually not too much of a hassle. The other thing that we do, and this is super powerful, is we upload our credit card statements in a CSV format. And what that does is that next to the invoices, we now also see the credit card statements inside CleanShelf, which means that if we haven't uploaded an invoice, we can see that very quickly that we had an invoice on the card, and so we need to find that additional invoice. This also actually helps us to discover some shadow IT, where someone with a credit card within the company procured a SaaS service without informing me as a platform gardener, and therefore not adding it to CleanShelf. This way I can see which services were added. It also is very useful because oftentimes on the credit card statements, the accounting team isn't really able to figure out what service this was for. So the cool thing about this upload of the credit card statement is that we have a complete list inside CleanShelf where CleanShelf does the mapping for us. So if there's, a random, I just had this case where it says like platform service or something like that. And obviously the accounting team didn't know which service this was, and then they just looked inside CleanShelf in the list of credit card statements and then saw that this was actually UserBit, another software as a service product that we use. Now, the last bit where CleanShelf picks up data is using Google Auth. So any SaaS service where any of our employees use Google Auth to log in, Clean Shelf automatically picks up on that and adds that user to the list of members. So this is also a very, very effective way for us to kind of bridge that gap that I mentioned earlier, where we're not giving Clean Shelf access to all our SaaS services. Still, there are some services which provide neither a billing rule nor Google Auth, or at least they don't allow us to enforce Google Auth. So it's not perfect, but it gets us pretty close to perfect. Now, so how do Leapers use Clean Shelf then in practice? So basically, they log in with Google Auth, and then they can see, all the data across all the SaaS services, ordered by department, and department we're using sort of as circles in the Holacracy sense, so they can really see which circle has which costs, and then they of course can look it on a specific service. They can find out who the owner of that service is in case they have questions or they have licensing needs. They can also see some additional information like links to how-tos, the Slack channel that is being used around this service, license keys and things like that. And again, they can also see information about ISO compliance. So for example, they can see if this service was green-lighted for confidential information, for example. Now, let me give you a brief excursion on Holacracy. So in Holacracy, there are many ways, many concepts. I mentioned some of them already, which is basically the role, circle, purpose, and accountabilities. Now, another thing that a role can have next to accountabilities is what is called a domain. With a domain, the circle or that role gets control over a specific resource. So, for example, the company website, the accounting system, and things like that. And this is really very useful in case a specific resource requires, domain knowledge to be used effectively. So this is the one way in Holacracy how we can still retain some control, because by default, Holacracy defines that everything is allowed that isn't explicitly forbidden. So even if a role has an accountability for something, it doesn't mean that somebody that doesn't have that role can do the same thing, unless, of course, you have a domain which gives the one specific role control over the topic. So I recently asked to have a domain added for adoption of new SaaS services. So at the bottom, you see a screenshot from the tool we use called HoloSpirit, where we have this entire Holacracy structure basically visible for everyone. So at the very bottom of the screen, you can see that adopting new SaaS, in parentheses, except for what Leapers pay from their software allowance. So these are basically, anytime somebody wants to adopt a new SaaS service, they have to go to me, inform me, so that I can make sure that we look at all the different things that are necessary for procurement. So not only do I have a credit card, of course, to do the final purchase, but I make sure that things get added to Clean Shelf, that before it's even adopted, I do some sanity checks like, did you check if other services already cover this need? And also work with them through a small risk assessment to make sure that there are not surprises there. And then at the end of the day, as I stated before, the final purchase decision is made by the person requesting the service, not by me, because I've given them all the information they need to be able to make that decision on their own. And they know what the impact of that service will be for their daily work. So they know if the costs are warranted, if the risks are warranted, etc. Now, I do have expectation on the service owners, and usually whoever requests the service becomes the service owners. In many cases, I am, in the end, the service owner, especially things that span across the entire company. I tend to be the owner in the end. But the expectations are basically that they participate in the initial risk assessment. They also do regular checks, at least once per year, to see if the service is actually still needed. If we've, taken all the steps to optimize costs, if all the relevant users have access or don't have access anymore because they don't need it anymore. And then again, to check ISO compliance. They're also responsible to ensuring that the invoices somehow end up in Clean Shelf, so either with that billing rule, a direct connection, forwarding email, or uploading those invoices manually. And the last bit is we have some services which we can actually charge to our customers. So in that situation, they need to add the bill customer tag so that the accounting team knows that this is a service that needs to be billed to a customer, and then they also add the project ID in the notes so they know which customer needs to be invoiced. Now, the key takeaways of our approach here is that transparency really enables the risk management, both for the individual and for the organization. Transparency also enables decentralized decision making, and this combination of the two is really the empowerment of people through transparency, and therefore they see transparency as an opportunity, not as a hurdle. So they see the benefits of talking to me. And in the past, really, when people didn't talk to me, and it was more that they didn't realize about this process, which I've now made more explicit with this domain. But yeah, they generally see it's much easier for them to make sure that the accounting team gets the invoices, that they can manage costs and access and so on and so forth. So really, they want this transparency, and therefore they work with me on this. And so fundamentally, I guess the one key takeaway here is that with the right tooling, you can enable this level of empowerment and risk management, which then means that you can ideally do SaaS procurement much more efficiently and much more to the needs of the organization. So that's all I wanted to say today. I hope you got something out of the talk, and if you have any questions, I guess you've already been asking those in the sidebar. I will be happy to answer them in person now. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you'll all be saving lots of money thanks to these series of talks. Bye-bye.
All right, that was a great session. Thank you so much for that presentation today. So, our speaker will be in the chat room for the remaining period of time, so please ask your questions and continue the conversation. And then please join us for the rest of our sessions coming up. Visit our sponsors, MobiCord, Upland Software, Vision Wireless, and WidePoint in their booths, and then also hang out with us in the networking lounge. Have a great event.